إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Today we continue with our weekly lesson on the night of Al-Arbi'a, the night of Wednesday, from the book, the explanation of the mandhuma of the poem that is entitled Manhaj al Haqq, the methodology of truth, by its author Shaykh al-Allama Abdul Rahman ibn Nasir as-Sa'idi rahimahullah ta'ala, and we are on page 61 of the book. And we are approaching the conclusion of the book, having covered a number of things that are important, that are the thamarat of Iman, the fruits of faith, such as sincerity to Allah, following the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the importance of patience, and these sorts of things. The Shaykh continues mentioning the importance of al-mahabbatu wal-khawfu wal-raja, of love, hope, and fear. Of love, hope, and fear. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَكُنْ سَائِرًا بَيْنَ الْمَخَافَةِ وَالرَّجَاءِ هُمَا كَجَنَحِ طَائِرٍ حِينَ تَقْصِدُ. And be sa'iran, one who journeys and endeavors, بَيْنَ الْمَخَافَةِ وَالرَّجَاءِ, between fear and hope. Between fear and hope. These two things, هُمَا كَجَنَحِ طَائِرٍ حِينَ تَقْصِدُ, they are like the two wings of a bird, حِينَ تَقْصِدُ, that you will be able to use whenever you are intent on getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we mentioned, as we'll see in the words of the Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Abad, there are three things, which are al-mahabbatu wal-khawfu wal-raja. But if you have the text, it's not on the wall yet. Allahumma musta'an. If you look at the text, he says, وَكُنْ سَائِرًا بَيْنَ الْمَخَافَةِ وَالرَّجَاءِ هُمَا كَجَنَحِ طَائِرٍ حِينَ تَقْصِدُ. He only mentions explicitly two things. And those two things are, Ali, the two things that I mentioned are what? He says, وَكُنْ سَائِرًا بَيْنَ الْمَخَافَةِ وَالرَّجَاءِ. الْخَوْفُ وَالرَّجَاءِ. الْخَوْفُ وَالرَّجَاءِ. But where's the mahabba here? Right? Because the scholars always mention these three things. And here, the Sharih, Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Abad, he mentions three things. Can you find that in the line of poetry? The author, he says, كُنْ سَائِرًا وَأَسَائِرُ إِلَى شَيْءٍ يعني يتقرب إلى غايته. The person who is traveling towards something is trying to get close to his objective and his goal. And a person لا يتقرب إلا ما يحبه. And a person who loves something, who journeys towards something, doesn't journey except towards that which he loves and try to get close to that which he loves. Also in the statement, حين تقصد, at the time that you make your qasd, meaning qasd taqarrub, and the intention of getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the three things that I mentioned here, mantuqan wa mafhuman, yani in explicit form and in implicit form, he says, وَكُنْ سَائِرًا بَيْنَ الْمَخَافَةِ وَالرَّجَى. Be one who is a sa'ir, a traveler, a journeyer, who journeys towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, بين المخافة والرجاء, between fear and hope. حين تقصد في سيرك الله عز وجل حبا له وطلبا لرضاه كن في هذا السير إليه تبارك وتعالى بين المخافة والرجاء. The explainer of the book, he says that whenever a person intends and is intent on journeying towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his seeking of Allah's good pleasure, كن في هذا السير إليه تبارك وتعالى بين المخافة والرجاء. Then when you are in this condition of trying to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then be in a state between fear and hope. وهذه الثلاث المحبة والرجاء والخوف محركات القلوب يحتاج القلب إليها دوما وأبدا. These three things that he mentions here, or that I mentioned in some way here, love, hope and fear, they are محركات القلوب, the things that cause the heart to move. The things that cause the heart to move. If a person wants to look at the difference between us and the Salaf, then they look at these three things. Al-mahabbatu wal-khawfu wal-raja. The level of love, hope and fear. The great scholar, Ibn Mandah, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions this in his book Kitab al-Iman, and he talks about the difference between the Salaf and those who came after them, and how the difference between them was these three things. What caused their level of worship to be where it was, and what causes our level of worship to be where it is our level of love of Allah, hope in Allah, and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a weakness thereof. So he says these three things, they are muharrikatun al-qulub. They are the things that move the heart. So scholars, they say these three things, they are usul al-ubudiyyat al-qalbiyya, the fundamentals of the worship of the heart. The fundamentals of the worship of the heart. They are the things that cause the heart to move, that motivate the heart to make a change for the positive. That the heart is in need of dawman wa abadan, at all times and consistently. وَيَجِبُ أَن تَكُونَ مَعَ الْعَبْدِ بِاسْتِمْرَارٍ. And these three things must accompany the abd of Allah, the worshipful slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a continuous fashion. فَاللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ يُعْبَدُ بِالْحُبِّ وَالرَّجَاءِ وَالْخَوْفِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worshipped by way of these three things. وَحُبُّ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى هُوَ الَّذِي يَجْعَلُ الْعَبْدَ يَسِيرُ فِي هَذَا الطَّرِيقِ. And this love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what causes a person to journey down this road that leads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to begin with. وَالْخَوْفُ وَالرَّجَاءُ كَمَا وَصَفَهُمَا النَّاظِمُ كَمَا وَصَفَهُمَا النَّاظِمُ رحمه الله تعالى وأهل العلم قبله كجنح الطائر في هذا المصير. And these two affairs of love and hope, as have been described by the Nazim, the author of the poetry, As-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, and as was described by the people of knowledge before him, they are like the two wings of a bird. في هذا المصير, in proceeding in this journey. قال شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية رحمه الله تعالى. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a tremendous book that was recently translated into English by one of our brothers, that is called Qa'idatun fil Mahabba, a principle pertaining loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this book, it opens up with this following statement that you are about to hear. This is found right in the beginning of the book. He says, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, ولا بد من التنبيه على قاعدة تحرك القلوب إلى الله عز وجل فتعتصم به فتقل آفاتها وتذهب عنها بالكلية بحول الله وقوته. فنقول he says that it is imperative to bring attention to a principle pertaining how to motivate and move the hearts towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how to cause the hearts to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَتَعْتَصِمُوا بِهِ, so that they find protection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَتَقِلُّ آفَاتُهَا أَوْ تَذْهَبُ عَنْهَا بِالْكُلِيَّةِ, so that the afat, the amrad, the sicknesses of the heart and the flaws of the heart and the imperfections of the heart can be lessened, so that a person has as least or as little imperfection in his heart as possible by way of these things, and so that what exists in his heart of sickness and deficiency can depart entirely بِحَوْلِ اللَّهِ وَقُوَّتِهِ, by the help and the assistance of Allah Azza wa Jal. فَنَقُولُ, he said, and so we say, اعلم أن محركات القلوب إلى الله عز وجل ثلاثة المحبة والخوف والرجاء. Know that the things that move the heart towards Allah Azza wa Jal are three things, and they are love, hope, and fear. وأقواها المحبة وهي مقصودة تراد لذاتها. The strongest of these three things is one's love of Allah Azza wa Jal, the thing that will propel a person's heart towards Allah Azza wa Jal and bring a person's heart closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. More than anything else is there a love of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this love of Allah Azza wa Jal, مَقْصُودَةٌ تُرَادُ لِذَاتِهَا, it is something that is intended in and of itself. We'll come to see what he means by this. It is something that is intended in and of itself, not because of its connection to something else. Meaning, he said, لأنها تراد في الدنيا والآخرة بخلاف الخوف فإنه يزول في الآخرة. Because this is something that is intended from the person, that Allah wants from the person in this world and in the hereafter. In this world and in the hereafter. As opposed to fear. Fear for the believer, الذين آمنوا ولم يلبسوا إيمانهم بظلم أولئك لهم الأمن وهم محتدون. Those who believe and do not taint their faith with oppression and wronging themselves, wronging their souls with disbelief or sin and disobedience or the likes, then they will have safety, and they are the muhtadun. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said in the Hadith Qudsi, was graded to be authentic by Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala in his checking of the book Al-Jami al-Saghir wa Ziyadatuhu by Suyuti. He says, the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that Allah Azza wa Jal, يقول الله Azza wa Jal, that Allah the Mighty and Majestic, he said, وَعِزَّتِي وَجَلَالِي لَا أَجْمَعُ لِعَبْدِي بَيْنَ أَمْنَيْنِ وَلَا بَيْنَ خَوْفَيْنِ. I swear by my might and my majesty that I will not gather for my slave between two states of safety or two states of fear. In خَافَنِي فِي الدُّنْيَا أَمَنْتُهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. If he feared me in this dunya, I will make him feel safe from me in the hereafter. May Allah make us from those who fear him as he deserves. And so, the person who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world, then by performing this act of worship for Allah Azza wa Jal, then in the hereafter, this fear is something that is muradun lima yasilu ilayhi, and it is intended because it is a wasila for a ghaya. Rahmakallah. It is a means to an end. And so when you reach that end, yadmahil, yazul, and it goes away. A person has no more fear in the hereafter. Once they enter the paradise is a place, and darul salam, it is a home, the world of safety and security. And so a person feels peace in the paradise, and there is no more fear. And so fear is something that is intended because of what it leads to. However, the love of Allah Azza wa Jal is something that continues in the hereafter. It continues in the hereafter, just as the two things, the scholars, they mention that there are two things that they say, alamatay al-mahabba, the two signs of al-mahabba are the things that are mentioned in the statement of the Prophet ﷺ to Mu'adh when he said, يا معاذ إني أحبك في الله فلا تنسى أن تقول دبر كل صلاة اللهم أعني على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. Oh Mu'adh, I love you for Allah. Don't forget to say at the end of every salah, oh Allah, help me to remember you, to be grateful to you, and to worship you well. And so ibadah in the hereafter is gone. But these other two things, they exist, which are al-dhikr wa shukr. Al-dhikr wa shukr. As the author, he is going to mention, and he later on in this poem, he said, وَقَدْ أَخْبَرَ النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وَقَدْ أخبر النبي وَقَدْ أخبر أن الذكر يبقى بجنة وينقطع التكليف حين يخلد. He mentions towards the end of this book, when he mentions the fawaid of dhikr, that the Prophet ﷺ mentions that a dhikr يبقى في جنة, that it remains in the paradise. يلحمون التسبيح والتحميد والتحليل كما يلحمون النفس, and that they will be inspired to naturally, without any effort, to say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah in the hereafter, just as easily and as simple as they breathe naturally in this world and as they will in the hereafter, and they will praise and glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a sign of a person's love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How much man أحب شيئا أكثر من ذكره. A person who loves a thing is going to speak about that thing frequently. You see a person who loves sports, he loves watching boxing, or if he loves watching entertainment or so on and so forth, or a person who loves playing video games, or a person who loves amusing themselves and wasting their time, so on and so forth. That's what they're going to talk about. You see the disbelievers, that's what they talk about. The people of ghafla, that's what they talk about. The things that they are obsessed with, that they spend a lot of time with. People that are fickle-minded, they talk about other people a lot. As some of the Salaf, they said, ذِكْرُ النَّاسِ دَاءٌ وَذِكْرُ اللَّهِ دَوَاءٌ. That to speak about people and mention people is a sickness. مَدْحًا وَضَمًّا. To speak about people, either praising them or dispraising them. There's no benefit of just sitting around praising people and speaking well of people. And there's no benefit of just sitting around and dispraising people and criticizing people. This is a sickness. And remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a cure. Meaning it is that which cures the heart. It is a sign of a person's love of Allah azza wa jal. And so it is muradatun lidhatiha. And it is something that is intended in and of itself. It is intended and desired in and of itself. And it is something that is existent in this world and in the hereafter. As opposed to al-khawf, فَإِنَّهُ يَزُولُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. For verily that departs in the hereafter. Allah Azza wa Jal, He said, أَلَا إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ أَلَا إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. That certainly the allies of Allah Azza wa Jal, there is no fear upon them, and nor shall they grieve. Meaning they have nothing to fear pertaining to the future. They have no reason to be sad about the past. وَالْخَوْفُ المقصود منه الزجر والمنع والمنع من الخروج عن الطريق. So the purpose of fear is to discourage a person and to prevent a person from leaving from the path, فالمحبة تلقي العبد في السير إلى محبوبه. All of this is still the speech of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. He says love is that which places the person في السير إلى محبوبه, upon the journey to his beloved Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. وعلى قدر ضعفها وقوتها يكون سيره إليه. And according to the weakness of a person's love, or the strength of a person's love, will be how well they journey towards Allah Azza wa Jal. فالخوف يمنعه أن يخرج عن طريق المحبوب. So his fear, once he is upon the path, is what prevents him from leaving from the path that leads him to the one that he loves, Azza wa Jal. Some of the Salaf, they said about a person's iman. Abu Idris al-Khawlani, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, may Allah have mercy upon him, and he was from the imams of the tabi'een. He said, ما على ظهرها من أحد أي على ظهر الأرض ما على ظهرها من أحد لا يخاف على إيمانه أن يذهب إلا ذهب. إلا ذهب أي قد ذهب إيمانه لعدم خوفه من الضلال. That there is no person on the face of the earth who doesn't fear losing his iman except that his iman has already departed. Except that his iman has already departed. Or as was said by Hasan al-Basri, he said about nifaq, لا يخافه إلا مؤمن ولا يأمنه إلا منافق. That no one fears hypocrisy except for the believer, and no one feels safe from hypocrisy except for the munafiq. And so Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَعَلَى قَدْرِ ضَعْفِهَا أي ضعف المحبة وقوتها يكون سيره إليه. According to a person's level of love, being strong or weak will be how well he journeys towards Allah. وَالْخَوْفُ يَمْنَعُهُ أَنْ يَخْرُجَ عَنْ طَرِيقِ الْمَحْبُوبِ. While fear, on the other hand, is what prevents him from leaving from this path that takes him to his mahbub. وَالرَّجَاءُ يَقُودُهُ. وَالرَّجَاء, and his hope in the reward of Allah Azza wa Jal, يَقُودُهُ, is that which directs him. It is that which directs him. فَهَذَا أَصْلٌ عَظِيمٌ يَجِبُ عَلَى كُلِّ عَبْدٍ أَنْ يَتَنَبَّهَ لَهُ. And this is a tremendous principle, therefore, that is mandatory upon every abd of Allah Azza wa Jal to pay attention to. فَإِنَّهُ لَا تَحْصُلُ لَهُ الْعُبُودِيَّةُ بِدُونِهِ. Because he will not be able to properly worship Allah Azza wa Jal without these things, or without this principle. وَكُلُّ أَهَدٍ يَجِبُ أَنْ يَكُونَ عَبْدًا لِلَّهِ لَا لِغَيْرِهِ. And every person must be the slave of Allah Azza wa Jal alone, and not be the slave of Allah, the slave of anything besides Allah, and not be the slave of anything besides Allah Azza wa Jal. حين تقصد, the author, Shaykh Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, وَكُنْ سَائِرًا بَيْنَ الْمَخَافَةِ وَالرَّجَى هُمَا كَجَنَحِ طَائِرٍ حين تقصد أي حين تقصد الله عز وجل محبا له طالبا لرضاه. Meaning, at the time, whenever a person wants to journey towards Allah Azza wa Jal, he is intent upon getting nearer to Allah Azza wa Jal because of his love of Allah Azza wa Jal, and seeking and desiring the good pleasure of Allah, seeking to please Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Ta'ala, he said, أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ يَبْتَغُونَ إِلَى رَبِّهِمُ الْوَسِيلَةَ أَيُّهُمْ أَقْرَبُ وَيَرْجُونَ رَحْمَةَ وَيَخَافُونَ عَذَابَ. That these ones, يَدْعُونَ, that they call upon besides Allah, these things that they call upon besides Allah, يَبْتَغُونَ إِلَى رَبِّهِمُ الْوَسِيلَةَ. These things, they seek a means of nearness to Allah Azza wa Jal themselves. Meaning those things like the malaika that are called upon besides Allah Azza wa Jal, and like the anbiya that are called upon besides Allah Azza wa Jal, that people worship wrongly. يَبْتَغُونَ إِلَى رَبِّهِمُ الْوَسِيلَةَ. These things, they seek a wasila, they seek a means of nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَيُّهُمْ أَقْرَبُ, to see which of them are closest, which can get closest to Allah. They compete, they have any munafasa, they have a desire to see which of them can get closest to Allah, nearer to Allah Azza wa Jal. وَيَرْجُونَ رَحْمَةً. So this is أَيُّهُمْ أَقْرَبُ, this is mahabba. They want to see which can be nearer to Allah Azza wa Jal. Which can be nearer to Allah Azza wa Jal. Because of the love of Allah, they want to be as close to Allah as possible. وَيَرْجُونَ رَحْمَةً, and they hope for His mercy. وَيَخَافُونَ عَذَابَهُ, and they fear His torment. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, likewise he said, فَمَا حُفِظَتْ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ وَمَحَارِمُهُ, that the boundaries of Allah and His maharim and the sanctities of Allah Azza wa Jal are not safeguarded. وَوَصَلَ الْوَاصِلُونَ إِلَيْهِ بِمِثْلِ خَوْفِهِ وَرَجَائِهِ وَمَحَبَّتِهِ. And those that want to get close to Allah and arrive safely at Allah Azza wa Jal, al-wasiluna ilayhi, those that want to arrive safely at Allah Azza wa Jal, there is nothing that is more guaranteed to bring that about than fearing Allah, hoping for Allah's reward, and loving Allah. فَمَتَى خَلَى الْقَلْبُ مِنْ هَذِهِ الثَّلَاثِ فَسَدَ فَسَادًا لَا يُرْجَى صَلَاحُهُ أَبَدًا. So when the heart is empty of these three things, then it will be corrupted in such a way that it can never expect to recover from. It will be corrupted to such a level that it can never expect to recover and be corrected thereafter. وَمَتَى ضَعُفَ فِيهِ شَيْءٌ مِّنْ هَذِهِ ضَعُفَ إِيمَانُهُ بِحَسَبِهِ. And when any of these three things are weak within his heart, then his iman will be weak accordingly. His iman will be weak accordingly. So if a person wants to increase in their iman, then they increase in these three things. And as they read the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, and as they learn beneficial knowledge, then they make sure that the purpose of this knowledge is to move their heart. Is to move their heart to make them a person who is more loving of Allah and what Allah loves, more fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His punishment, therefore hating what Allah hates, and more hopeful in the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His paradise. He continues, rahimahullah ta'ala, with the next line of poetry about ahamiyat al-nasiha or al-nush li'ibadillah, and the importance of al-nasiha, the importance of al-nasiha, wal-nasiha iradatul khayri lil-ghayr. The scholars, they say the meaning of al-nasiha is to desire others, desire good for others as you desire for yourself, to want good for others as you want it for yourself. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَقَلْبَكَ طَهِّرْهُ وَمِن كُلِّ آفَةٍ. Purify your heart in general, and specifically purify your heart from every afa, from every aib, from every defect, from every afa, from every sickness and disease. وَكُنْ أَبَدًا عَنْ عَيْبِهِ تَتَفَقَّدُ. And be perpetually and consistently, incessantly a person who is searching out the uyub of their nafs, who is seeking out the uyub in their heart and in their nafs, and the flaws and the imperfections that exist within themselves, so as to repair them. He says, وَقَلْبَكَ طَاحِرْهُ وَمِن كُلِّ آفَةٍ أي يجتهد في تطهير قلبك في تطهير قلبك وتنقيته من كل الآفات كاجتهادك في تطهير ملابسك. He said, meaning that you should work hard and diligently to purify your heart and to make it pristine and clean from every type of impurity, just as you would do so for a garment of clothing. If a person had an enormous stain on the front of his thobe, he would go and get some cold water and some OxyClean and maybe some lemon juice and whatever it took to get the big stain out the front of his thobe before he stood in front of his brothers in the salat, before he was seen in public with a big stain on his thobe. What about his soul? What about his heart? What about the reality of his heart? And if he is embarrassed to be seen in public with filth upon his person, now what about being seen by alim al-ghaybi wa shahada, the one who sees everything that is witnessable by other people and everything that is from the realm of the unseen? He said, وَتَنْظِيفِ بَدِنِكَ مِنَ الْأَوْسَاخِ. Just as you strive to purify your garment and to clean your body from filth and impurity, وَالْقَلْبُ أَوْلَى بِالتَّطْهِيرِ. The heart of the person is more rightful to be purified. وَهُوَ يُبْتَلَى بِآفَاتٍ كَثِيرًا. And the heart is tested with a variety and an assortment of sicknesses and flaws. وَيُصَابُ بِأَسْقَامٍ عَدِيدًا. And it is tried and tested and afflicted with a number of diseases. قال شيخ الإسلام في كتابه أمراض القلوب وشفاؤها. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he said in a book that is called, popularly this book it is called, The Sicknesses and Cures of the Heart. And this book is also translated into English. This book is translated, it was translated many years ago, about 15 years ago. The Sicknesses and Cures of the Heart. The sicknesses of the heart and their cures. This book, it is, the correct name for the book, it is called At-Tuhfatul Iraqiyya fil Amrad al-Qalbiyya. The gift to the people of Iraq about the ahwal al-qalbiyya, and the affairs of the heart and the conditions, the state the states of being in the heart. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, مرض القلب هو نوع فساد يحصل له يفسد به تصوره وإرادته. This is almost word for word what you find and what we read just last week in the book Ighathat al-Ahfan. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, you can smell the breath of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala and his Talmid Ibn Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhima. These two Shaykhay al-Islam في عصرهما وفيما بعد, these two shuyukh of Islam in their time and thereafter. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that the sickness of the heart is a type of corruption and ruinous condition that happens to the heart. يَفْسُدُ بِهِ تَصَوُّرُهُ وَإِرَادَتُهُ. What happens as a result of the sickness of the heart is two things: فَسَادُ التَّصَوُّرُ وَفَسَادُ الْإِرَادَةِ. The corruption of a person's ability to understand and perceive and conceptualize things as they are, and the corruption of a person's ability to want what is good for him, and included in that is to hate what is harmful for him. فَتَصَوُّرُهُ بِالشُّبُهَاتِ الَّتِي تعرض له حتى لا يرى الحق أو يراه على خلاف ما هو عليه. He said, and so the person, I think it should say فتصوره القلوب بالشبهات التي تعرض له حتى لا يرى الحق أو يراه على خلاف ما هو عليه. And so the hearts may see, or they may perceive things based upon shubuhat. Shubuhat, there being a shabah, there being a resemblance between truth and falsehood, where a person cannot decipher, he cannot make any a tamyiz, a distinction, a tafriq between right and wrong, what is beneficial, what is harmful, and so on and so forth. And so the hearts perceive things based upon shubuhat, based upon doubts that are presented to the heart, to the extent that they cannot distinguish and decipher between what is true and what is untrue, or they see the truth to be other than what it really is. They see the truth to be falsehood. They cannot distinguish the truth or see the truth and recognize it, or they see it contrary to how it is. وَإِرَادَتُهُ بِحَيْثُ يُبْغِضُ الْحَقَّ النَّافِعُ أو يحب الباطل الضار. نعوذ بالله. He said, and the fasad, the corruption of his irada, of its intention, is a person's hatred of the truth that is beneficial for him, and his love of the falsehood that is harmful for him. And his love of the falsehood that is harmful for him. وَتَطْهِيرُ الْقَلْبِ يَكُونُ بِالتَّوْحِيدِ وَالْإِخْلَاصِ وَالصِّدْقِ وَعِمَارَتُهُ بِالْعَمَالِ الْقَلْبِيَّةِ. The purification of the heart comes about by way of a tawheed, wal-ikhlas, was-sidq, singling out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with His rights, being sincere in worship for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and being genuine in one's worship of Allah and determined. وَعِمَارَتُهُ بِالْعَمَالِ الْقَلْبِيَّةِ الصَّالِحَةِ الَّتِي يَكُونُ بِهَا طَهَارَةُ الْقَلْبِ وَتَقَاؤُهُ وَنَقَاؤُهُ وَسَلَامَتُهُ. And by a person's enlivening his heart with the worship of the heart, that bring about its purity and its being cleaned out and its being made sound and healthy. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he said in his tremendous book Al-Fawaid, Al-Qalbu yamrudu kama yamrudu al-badan. The heart becomes sick, yamrudu kama yamrudu al-badan, and becomes sick just as the body becomes sick. وَشِفَاؤُهُ فِي التَّوْبَةِ وَالْحِمْيَةِ وَيَصْدَأُ كَمَا تَصْدَأُ الْمِرْآةُ وَجَلَاؤُهُ بِالذِّكْرِ. He said the heart, it becomes sick just as the body becomes sick, and the cure is found within a person repenting to Allah and safeguarding himself from getting sick thereafter. And the heart, it becomes tarnished, just as a mirror tarnishes. A person, if they have a mirror made of iron or made of metal, right? If you have a piece of silver jewelry or so on and so forth, something that you can see a reflection in it, it tarnishes, right? It tarnishes, it becomes dull. The heart also becomes dull, it becomes tarnished. وَجَلَاؤُهُ بِالذِّكْرِ. And in order to shine and polish up the heart, a person makes dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal. He remembers Allah Azza wa Jal. وَيَعْرَى كَمَا يَعْرَى الْجِسْمِ. And the heart becomes unclothed and naked, just as the body becomes unclothed and naked. وَزِينَتُهُ تَقْوَى. And the beautification of the heart that covers up what is unsightly in the heart is the taqwa of Allah Azza wa Jal. وَيَجُوعُ وَيَضْمَعُ كَمَا يَجُوعُ الْبَدَنُ وَطَعَامُهُ وَشَرَابُهُ الْمَعْرِفَةُ وَالْمَحَبَّةُ وَالتَّوَكُّلُ وَالْإِنَابَةُ. And the heart becomes hungry and thirsty, just as the body becomes hungry and thirsty. And the food and the drink of the heart is ma'rifatullah, is knowing Allah, loving Allah, placing one's reliance upon Allah, wal inaba, and constantly turning to Allah Azza wa Jal. We heard in the statement of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala that the basis of the sickness of the heart and the fasad of the heart is two things, which is fasad al-tasawwur and fasad al-irada. And a person's corruption in their ability, in the ability of their heart to perceive and understand, and in its ability to want and intend. Likewise, we know that Tawheed naw'ain, that there are two categories of Tawheed: Tawheed al-ma'rifa wal-ithbat, wa Tawheed al-talabi wal-qasd. The Tawheed of knowing about Allah and affirming for Allah what Allah had affirmed for Himself, and the Prophet ﷺ affirmed for Allah, which is also called the Tawheed al-ilmi, the Tawheed of knowledge. And the second type of Tawheed, which is called the Tawheed of al-talabi wal-qasd, the Tawheed of worship, which is the Tawheed of seeking and intending. And so we see how these two categories of Tawheed are matched up to the functions of the heart. And so the more a person knows about Allah's names, attributes, and actions, and the more they know about, and the more they single out Allah with worship, mahabbatan wa khawfan wa raja'an, lovingly, hoping, and expectantly, and fearfully, and fearing the punishment of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, the more their heart becomes sound, and the more their heart becomes healthy. He says, وَكُنْ أَبَدًا عَنْ عَيْبِهِ تَتَفَقَّدُ. And incessantly, perpetually, consistently be a person that is searching after the flaws of their heart. أي دائما فتش عن عيوب نفسك. Meaning constantly analyze and look for and investigate pertaining the uyub, the flaws of your nafs, the flaws of yourself. وَعَنْ أَمْرَاضِ قَلْبِكَ. And the sicknesses of your heart. You're constantly looking for the sickness in your heart. وَمَاذَا فِيكَ مِنَ الْآفَاتِ. And be constantly looking at what exists within you of imperfections. لِتَعْمَلَ عَلَى تَنْقِيَتِهِ وَتَطْحِيرِهِ مُسْتَعِينًا بِاللَّهِ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى. So that you could be a person who is actively working to clean yourself and to purify yourself, seeking the assistance of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, مَنْ لَمْ يُطَحِّرَ اللَّهُ قَلْبَهُ فَلَا بُدَّ أَنْ يَنَالَهُ الْخِزْيُ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْعَذَابُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ بِحَسَبِ نَجَاسَةِ قَلْبِهِ وَخُبْثِهِ. He said that the person that Allah does not purify, the person whose heart is not purified by Allah Azza wa Jal, then it is unavoidable, it is inescapable, and it is la budda an yanaluhu al-khizyu fi dunya, and it is something that is definite, it is inexorable, it is something that is inescapable, that he will be humiliated in this world. Humiliation in this world will be unavoidable, and punishment in the hereafter will likewise be unavoidable according to, meaning they will be humiliated and they will be punished according to their level of filth and impurity that is in their heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أن يطهر قلوبنا وأن يجدد الإيمان في قلوبنا, and to purify our hearts and to renew the faith in our hearts. He says, he continues, we'll stop there actually because it's about time for the adhan, right? How long to the adhan? 5 minutes. Yeah, we could do this last line of poetry. He says, Rahimahullah Ta'ala, وَجَمَّلْ بِنُصْحِ الْخَلْقِ قَلْبَكَ إِنَّهُ لَعَلَى جَمَالِنَا الْقُلُوبِ وَأَجْوَدُ. He says, and beautify your heart with nusх, with goodwill towards the creation. This is where we were trying to get. And he beautify your heart with goodwill towards the creation. إنه, certainly it, يعني النصح لَعَلَى جَمَالِنَا الْقُلُوبِ وَأَجْوَدُ. And he is the highest beauty for the heart. Is the highest beauty for the heart. The most beautiful trait that a person can have in his heart, that he wants good for others as he wants it for himself. وَأَجْوَدُ. And it is the most generous trait that a person can have. وَجَمِّلْ بِنُصْحِ الْخَلْقِ قَلْبَكَ أي حَلِّهِ وَزَيِّنْهُ دَائِمًا وَأَبَدًا بِالنُّصْحِ لِلْخَلْقِ. Beautify your heart with goodwill towards the creation and sincere advice towards the creation, meaning adorn it and beautify it consistently and regularly with this feeling of wanting good for other people. وَالْمُسْلِمُ مَطْلُوبٌ مِنْهُ أَنْ يَكُونَ دَائِمًا نَاصِحًا لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ غَيْرَ غَاشِ لَهُ. The Muslim is regularly required to, and he is required to constantly be in a condition of nasiha, and of wanting good for the Muslims and giving good advice to the Muslims. غَيْرَ غَاشِ لَهُ. As opposed to its opposite, the opposite of a nusх is al-ghish, and he is treachery. As opposed to being treacherous towards them. وَالنَّصِيحَةُ ضِدُّهَا الْغِشْ. This is the opposite of a nasiha. The opposite of genuineness and goodwill is treachery towards the people. Allah's Prophet ﷺ, he said, ad-dinu nasiha, ad-dinu nasiha, and the religion is a nasiha. He said it 3 times. قُلْنَا لِمَنْ. He said, nasiha pertaining who? He said, for Allah. وَلِكِتَابِهِ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِأَئِمَّةِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَعَامَتِهِمْ. The tafasil, the details of what is meant by nasiha lillah. وَلِكِتَابِهِ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِأَئِمَّةِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَعَامَتِهِمْ. And he is an explanation of the entire deen. Just like the hadith of Jibril, and the Prophet ﷺ, he said that this was Jibril, أَتَاكُمْ يُعَلِمُكُمْ أَمْرَ دِينِكُمْ. This is Jibril, he came to teach you about your deen. يُعَلِمُكُمْ أَمْرَ دِينِكُمْ, or دِينَكُمْ in one wording, and he came to teach you your deen. And he just as the hadith of Jibril is an explanation of the entire religion. And likewise the hadith of Tamim ad-Dari radiyallahu anhu wa ardahu. This hadith, the religion is sincere advice, and he is the details of what is meant by nasiha for Allah, for His book, for His messenger, for the leaders of the Muslims, and for the masses of the Muslims, is explanation or a summarization of everything in Islam. وَتَكُونُ النَّصِيحَةُ لَهُمْ بِأَنْ يُحِبَّ لَهُمْ مَا يُحِبُّ لِنَفْسِهِ. And this nasiha towards the Muslims is that he loves for them what he loves for himself. وَيَكْرَهُ لَهُ مَا يَكْرَهُ لِنَفْسِهِ وَيُشْفِقُ عَلَيْهِمْ. And that he dislikes for them what he dislikes for himself, and that he has ishfaq upon them, and that he has shafaqah for them, and that he is compassionate towards them, and he fearing harm for them. وَيَرْحَمُ صَغِيرَهُمْ. And that he shows mercy towards the youngers. وَيُوَقِّرُ كَبِيرَهُمْ. And that he has respect for his elders. وَيَحْزَنُ لِحُزْنِهِمْ. And that he is sad by that which saddens them. وَيَفْرَحُ لِفَرَحِهِمْ. And that he is enthralled and enjoyed and made joyous for what makes them happy and joyous. وَيُحِبُّ صَلَاحَهُمْ وَأُلْفَتَهُمْ وَدَوَامَ النِّعَمِ عَلَيْهِمْ. And that he loves to see them in a good condition, and he loves to see them united, and he loves to see that the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always upon them. وَنَصْرَهُمْ عَلَىٰ عَدُوِّهِمْ. And he loves to see them victorious over their adversaries. وَدَفْعَ كُلِّ أَذًى وَمَكْرُوهٍ عَنْهُمْ. And He loves to see them protected from everything harmful and everything noxious that is of a nuisance for them. وَنَحْوَ ذَلِكَ مِنَ الْمَعَانِ, and anything that is similar of that, of meanings. إِنَّهُ لَعَلَى جَمَالٍ الْقُلُوبِ وَأَجْوَدُ, that is the most beautiful quality of the heart and the most generous trait that a person can have. أي أن النصيحة للخلق والسلامة من غشهم تعد جمالا للقلوب وزينة لها. Meaning that this nasiha, that this sincere advice and goodwill for the creation, and his having soundness in his heart, being free of ghish, of any type of treachery or betrayal towards them, that this is considered beauty for the heart and adornment for the heart. بل هي أجمل وأجود ما تتجمل به القلوب وتتهلى. And much rather, it is the most beautiful and generous quality that the heart can beautify itself with and adorn itself with. وَنَقِيضُ ذَلِكَ الْغِشِّ, and the opposite of that is al-ghish, and he is treachery. فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ أَسْوَإِ مَا تَتَّصِفُ بِهِ الْقُلُوبِ, because that is from the most terrible things that the heart can incorporate within itself. بَلْ هُوَ مِنْ أَعْظَمِ أَسْبَابِ ظُلْمَتِهَا وَتَلَفِهَا, much rather it is from the greatest causes of the darkness of the heart and the destruction and ruin of the heart. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for al-huda wal-tuqa wal-afaf wal-ghina. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for piousness and guidance, and to keep us sufficed with what He has given to us, and to make us content. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. بارك الله فيك. You know what's weird is that without my glasses on, I can see a lot better out of this eye. But when I put the glasses on, everything is blurry. But without the glasses, everything in this eye is extremely blurry. Right? So I think I'm going to take a pair of glasses, as weird as it sounds, and just take the lens out of the right eye. Right? Because it's weird if I don't close the eye, one eye being focused, the other eye being blurry. It's like you get vertigo. It's like I get dizzy, Yeah.